When you're sending or receiving interstellar messages, it pays to think big. The bigger your radio, the further you can send. The bigger the web you spin, the more you can catch. This is Star Station Earth, the world's largest radio telescope, suspended by steel cables over a collapsed limestone bowl near Arecibo in Puerto Rico. Its vast size, 1,000 feet across, makes it our prime communications link with the stars, now and in the future. Here in 1974, the first deliberate broadcast from Earth was made. A 3-minute-long stream of binary information beamed to M13, a cluster of 1 million stars in the constellation of Hercules. Decoded by an intelligent alien, the signal would form a picture like this, giving basic information about where and from whom the message came. It was a symbolic rather than a serious attempt. Even at the speed of light, the message will take 25,000 years to reach its destination. If anyone's home at the time, our phones won't ring in reply for 50,000 years. The lesson is clear. If you are impatient, you should listen rather than send.
It is much easier to receive than to send when it comes to radio. In the number of people who have receivers to look at this program, video receivers, is very large compared to the number of transmitters. That's all you have to see. Not many people want to build video transmitters in their homes, but everybody wants to have a video receiver. And there's no question the same thing applies in the stars too. It is much, I won't say it's more blessed, but it's much cheaper to receive than it is to send.
So who's broadcasting? Probably advanced civilizations looking for us, or those careless with their transmissions, or those using interplanetary radar. Perhaps civilizations that have given up waiting for a message and decided to send. And if we were to receive, would we recognize the message? Imagine you had been marooned on a desert island since birth, with no contact with the outside world. One day, a message in a bottle washes up on the beach. Would you notice the message inside? Would you even realize what the bottle was? At least we think we'd recognize a cosmic message in a bottle. It would be a radio transmission so alien that it had to be artificial, a narrow pinprick standing out against the general wash of naturally occurring radio waves. But with trillions of stars to choose from, finding an extraterrestrial signal is a needle in the haystack problem of cosmological proportions.
We have very little in common with those creatures, whoever they are. But one thing we do have in common, that's the galaxy. We live in the same galaxy, or if it's a neighboring galaxy, we live in a galaxy not too unlike it. And the galaxy has a physical nature and a structure and a set of motions and a kind of contamination in space, whatever it may be. And that's what determines the nature of the signal.
When these creatures look up at night, their skies will be lit by stars. They'll hear the same whispers of the radio universe.
We don't use radio waves because that's our best technology, and we don't expect them, a more advanced technology, to use radio waves because it's their best technology. We use radio waves because nature gives us a quiet window at those frequencies. And if you're talking about sending or receiving signals over these vast interstellar distances, the signals are bound to be weak.
So what we do is listen in a region of the radio spectrum which is called the microwave window. And for those interested in the technical details, it's 1 to 10 gigahertz. That's 1 to 10 billion separate individual hertz or cycles per second.
If aliens are sending signals to us, it seems likely they'll broadcast through the same microwave window on the universe. But that still leaves a choice of 10 billion channels to search through. SETI researchers have had to narrow the search even further. Hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant atom in the universe. An atom that drifts throughout the heavens, vibrating quietly at a natural frequency of 1420 megahertz. This is a radio signature as unique as a particular color of light. In 1959, Philip Morrison proposed that this was the obvious frequency that they would choose. Their pure alien solo cutting clearly through the swirling song of hydrogen. Now the hunt could begin. With this equipment at Greenbank, West Virginia, Frank Drake began Project Ozma, the world's first radio SETI search. Drake probed the hydrogen frequencies of 2 nearby sun-like stars. Though unsuccessful, Ozma was the first of some 60 independent searches around the globe.
We're looking for a planet with atmosphere, where the air is fresh and the water clear, with lots of sunlight you have here, with 300 or 400 days a year, where humans from Earth, we're humans from Earth. You have nothing about to fear. I think we're gonna like it here.
We've come a long way. A year after the movie E.T. caught the public's imagination, Harvard professor Paul Horowitz was casting a much wider net in a search for a real E.T. Supported by a donation from Steven Spielberg, Project Meta pushed silicon technology to its 1983 limit. It could cover 8 million channels simultaneously.
This is the world's biggest garbage can, and it's getting very full with signals that are clearly of the wrong kind. On the other hand, you have to be aware that by looking for a very specific kind of signal, by positing a particular scenario, we're insensitive to other kinds of signals that these extraterrestrials may be sending. You know, maybe they're slightly nuts, and they're not sending the kind of signal that we think they should.
No one was expecting the strange signals that arrived in Cambridge in 1967.
Well, here's some of the signals we picked up. On the bottom track here, you can see those pulses coming in, and on the top track, there's time marks, 1-second intervals. And so you see you've got these very regular pulses coming at intervals of about 1 1/3 seconds. I mean, it couldn't have been locally generated interference from a spacecraft or something of that kind. It had to be out there well beyond the solar system. And at that time, I thought, well, what on earth could it be? There's no natural object which emits pulses like this. The only other thing is extraterrestrial intelligence. And for a while, I really thought that was the simplest explanation, although it was a kind of dreamlike feeling that, are we picking up aliens? But nevertheless, it's possible, and I had to face that possibility.
What Tony Hewish had found was decidedly strange, but not alien. Deeper analysis showed it was coming not from a planet, but from a pulsar, a collapsed star spinning once every second and beaming radiation like a lighthouse. But SETI researchers have had close encounters. Big Ear, just a short drive from Columbus, Ohio, in the middle of a golf course, home of the world's longest-running alien hunt.
you seen these strip charts that we got today?
Looks good.
It was here in 1977 that one of the most inexplicable signals was received.
Okay.
It was short and sweet, buried deep in the constant gush of numbers and letters that the Ohio astronomers used to rank the intensity of incoming radio noise.
Each column represents the output from one narrowband receiver. And if it's just a 1 or 2 or 3, it's not very exciting. Well, this signal, as it passed through our antenna, mapped out 6EQ-UJ5. Now that U was a stupendously strong signal, stronger than anything we've ever seen before. And furthermore, it mapped out the antenna pattern perfectly, so we know it was coming from a long distance away. Unfortunately, it was only there once. We saw it for about a minute. In fact, it turned off while we were watching it. And we went back there hundreds of times later to look for it, and it was never there. The person here who was looking at it at the time got so excited that he wrote "wow!" exclamation mark on the computer printout, and hence that name has stuck.
And for those 1.5 tantalizing hours in 1990, it seemed David Blair really might have made first contact.
We saw a small signal that, when we first saw it, wasn't particularly interesting. It was interesting enough to be worth going back and having a second look. When we had a second look, it was still there. We had a look at it a third time with a much longer integration time. It was still there. I'm inclined to believe that it was a computer problem or something of that sort, but you never know. There could have been a beacon there that just happened to be on at that time.
Now, twice in my life, I have thought I picked up an ambiguous signal. And I can tell you, you feel an emotion which can't be described. It's an entirely new emotion, an emotion that combines discovery, ecstasy, elation, all combined. So I've actually felt the emotion, temporarily, unfortunately. And I can assure you that when the real discovery comes, not only myself, but many of the people in the world will feel that very special emotion.